Tonight, as funerals continue in central Saskatchewan, more details are being revealed as to why Myles Sanderson was unlawfully at large for months before that stabbing rampage began. Also, a Saskatoon judge finds Leo Daniels guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Richard Furnock. Plus, long lines and ceremonies continue in London in the lead-up to Monday's funeral for Queen Elizabeth II.
This is CBC Saskatchewan News.
It is Friday, September 16th, and the CBC Saskatchewan News will start right now. Good evening, and thank you for watching. Today, hundreds of people gathered in the village of Weldon to celebrate the life of Wes Petterson. The 78-year-old was one of the 10 victims of the mass stabbing in that area nearly 2 weeks ago. Petterson was killed at his home in Weldon, not far from James Smith Cree Nation, where the other attacks occurred. His sister Vera Hockness says this unthinkable tragedy has left her numb. She remembers her brother as a friendly, kind man, one who loved helping people, his animals, and being outside, taking time to watch deer and squirrels pass by his house.
He loved sharing. He loved cooking. He had 2 cats he adored, and 3 hummingbirds that used to come back every year, and they were so tame they'd sit on his garden hose. I really felt, and I still feel that, a car accident, a plane accident, something, I lost my son to the H1N1 flu, and you can accept that. But it's so hard to accept this murderous rage.
Organizers were expecting at least 300 people to attend Petterson's funeral. Hockness says that speaks to the kind of person her brother was and the massive impact this tragedy has had on the community. She says her heart is breaking for all the people at James Smith Cree Nation who also lost loved ones. There is one funeral left for James Smith Cree Nation. It's planned for tomorrow. At the same time, we're learning more details about how police interacted with key suspect Myles Sanderson. The RCMP unit that tracks people wanted by police in this province says it wasn't looking for Sanderson before the stabbings, even though there was a warrant out for his arrest. As Sam Sampson tells us, some say they're not surprised.
The moment the manhunt ended, RCMP searched almost 4 days for Myles Sanderson after the stabbing massacre in James Smith Cree Nation. On paper, though, Sanderson had been a wanted man since May. He had stopped meeting with his parole caseworker, but RCMP say they weren't actively looking for him before the stabbings. Last November, Saskatchewan announced funding for an RCMP unit to track down people on the run. The plan was 8 officers with a support team. The unit launched in May and has 4 officers to find more than 6,600 people wanted by police in Saskatchewan. RCMP say the unit whittled that down to 63 priority cases, active criminals and fugitives with gang connections or a record of violence. Sanderson had 59 convictions, including assault, but he wasn't on that list.
I've had people that have been unlawfully at large for over a year before they're apprehended. Unless they're committing other offenses, they're kind of staying below the radar.
The Saskatchewan NDP says money would be better spent addressing the root causes of crime.
That's where the province needs to step in and hasn't been stepping in. And that's why we see our jails overflowing in Saskatchewan, an overwhelmingly Indigenous population within our jails, and a horrific level of recidivism.
Myles Sanderson died in custody, triggering a mandatory investigation into his death. But other pressing questions might be answered through a public inquiry, says a lawyer for families caught in Nova Scotia's mass shooting.
I think it's clear that any way that they can help ensure that other people, don't experience the same thing that they have, they're 100% invested in participating in any way they can.
We asked for interviews with the Saskatchewan RCMP and the Provincial Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety. The RCMP declined and the minister was unavailable. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Regina.
In Regina, the first-degree murder trial of Dylan Whitehawk has reached its halfway point. The 29-year-old is accused in the death of Regina mother Keisha Bitternose in January of 2020. 2 other people are already convicted of manslaughter in her killing. Autopsy results show Bitternose had too many wounds to determine her exact cause of death. For her loved ones, it's been a traumatic, nearly 3-year journey in several courtrooms.
To me, I'll never have justice. That's just the way I feel, you know. Maybe someday I'll forgive them. But right now, I just can't, you know what I mean? It's just, I feel that it's what they have done and what they put my daughters through will never be, any justice will never be good enough.
Court heard today from Crown expert witnesses who tested DNA samples from items from the crime scene, including a glove, a machete, and a screwdriver. This trial is set to continue on Monday at Court of King's Bench in Regina. In the end, a Saskatoon judge simply did not accept an accused killer's explanation for how his DNA ended up in a murder victim's apartment. Today, Justice Heather McMillan Brown found Leo Daniels guilty of first-degree murder. Police found the body of Richard Furnock tied to a chair in his apartment in August of 2019. The case turned on DNA found on a fireplace poker. Dan Zakreski brings us the story from Court of King's Bench.
It's not the way Richard Furnock's family would have liked to celebrate what would have been his 72nd birthday, but it's what they got. A first-degree murder conviction for the man charged with killing him.
I take no joy, no happiness in the fact that he's going to jail for life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. I believe his crime was caused by his meth addiction. And I don't think he's necessarily a violent or terrible person.
Richard Furnock met his killer after getting discharged from St. Paul's Hospital in August 2019. Daniels befriended the senior and then walked home with him. Daniels trashed Furnock's apartment and tied him to a chair where he choked to death. But Daniels didn't know he'd left some of his DNA on a fireplace poker. Justice McMillan Brown didn't buy Daniels' explanation for how the DNA got there. He claimed that it came from a jacket he'd loaned Furnock. McMillan Brown described this transfer theory as irrational. Dan Zakreski, CBC News, Saskatoon.
The official opposition says the provincial government's plan to retain healthcare workers is insufficient. Today, the leader of the NDP was joined by a concerned nurse practitioner. Carla Beck says the healthcare worker plan announced last week by the government lacked consultation. The government is spending $60 million to hire and retain healthcare professionals in the province, including bringing in 1,000 more workers. Beck says the government should have met with unions and frontline staff before developing its plan. That was echoed today by a nurse practitioner who works in Assiniboia.
Our healthcare system is crumbling today. We cannot rely on the potential of incentivized supports tomorrow. We need to invest in the people who have provided care to their communities through some of the most devastating experiences our healthcare system has ever faced.
Hosting says the government's new plans also offer incentives for people to come work in Saskatchewan, but she says the currently employed nurses are not eligible for any of that. A Regina care home is seeing most of its residents recover after a COVID-19 outbreak. Extended Care Elmview had all 46 permanent residents test positive within the last few weeks. 3 patients who tested positive died, but their cause of death has not been confirmed. The SHA says 39 patients have recovered. There are 7 active cases, and 14 staff who tested positive are isolating. Extended Care Parkside, which saw a major outbreak in 2020, is also in the midst of an outbreak. 60% of residents there tested positive. The SHA says about 20% are active cases. The Saskatchewan Roughriders can eliminate the Edmonton Elks from playoff contention tonight with a win. That is, if the 6 and 7 Riders can stay within 4 points of Calgary before that season-ending 2-game series against the Stamps. The Riders can still control their own fate and place higher than 4th in the West.
Guys know what they need to do. You know, they know we probably need to get to 8 or 9 to get into the playoffs for sure, at least on a crossover option, and we probably got to get to 10 if we're going to stay in the West. So the guys know we've got to win some games here in these last 5 or 6, and the main thing that I've been really trying to harp on is don't worry about the math too much. Let's just try to play our best football and let the score kind of take care of itself.
Well, earlier today, crews were getting ready over at Mosaic Stadium and Confederation Park to host fans for the game tonight in Regina. By now, this area will be full of people in jerseys ready for kickoff at 7:30. Tonight is the lights out game for the Riders, so when the game's over, there will be fireworks. What kind of weather will we have for that? Well, Ethan will have the answer after the break. Stay with us. Anxiety, stress, grief, they're difficult emotions to deal with at any age. But experts say children can benefit from play therapy using toys to act out their feelings and struggles. And it gives healthcare providers a sense of how a child views their life.
Play therapy is just as talk therapy is for adults. Children will often play out the challenges that they have, or maybe the anticipatory fears they have. You can really get a sense of how a child views life and challenges by watching them play. So a play therapist has very specific toys in their playroom that will provide the child with the ability to use those toys. Instead of using words, they can play out how they're feeling. This dollhouse is really wonderful. It gets used a lot by children who have experienced lots of moves in their life. So as a result of perhaps foster care or maybe homelessness, so they can open up each door and tell a story about that part of their life where they lived. We'll often have kiddos come and play through some traumas, which is why the emergency vehicles are helpful. And grief and loss issues. So important to have miniatures that represent different family members. And then often, especially since COVID, we're seeing such an increase in children experiencing anxiety.
This weather update is brought to you by Capital GMC Buick Cadillac, making back to busy easy.
And CBC weather specialist Ethan Williams joins me now. We have reached the weekend. It's been a cool week. What are we in for on our days off?
Looks like we're warming up a little bit, Sam, which will be nice, and clearing out too, especially for southern Saskatchewan, where we have been seeing cloudy conditions these last few days. But temperatures right now a little on the cool side, especially on the eastern side of the south and central region, still around 15 degrees. Sunshine came out in the southwest today, so we've had some nice warmer temperatures, close to 20 degrees. We were at 20 in North Battleford not long ago here, but we have slipped just below that at this point. Now, if you're a fan of the warm temperatures, well, you might be liking this extended outlook from Environment Canada. There is a good chance that a lot of us will be seeing above average temperatures through the rest of this month, October, and into November as well. In fact, a 50 to 60% chance through much of the province, including Saskatoon and Regina. A little bit less of a chance in the southwest part of the province and in the far north. Now, we don't know how much above average these temperatures are going to be. Not like we're going to be seeing 30 degrees in November or anything like that, but could be a little bit warmer than what we're used to expecting. Now, for tonight, we are looking at widespread fog through much of south and central Saskatchewan, the exception being that southwest corner where you'll see some showers. Frost is also possible with clear skies and temperatures close to the freezing mark in the Hudson Bay area once again. And there's a few different time frames that we're looking at that fog to build in. Wee hours of tomorrow morning, Lloydminster will be down to just under a kilometer of visibility, and then that fog shifts eastward, and Regina and Yorkton will be under about 2 kilometers, and we get to the early morning hours tomorrow around 8 a.m., and that's really going to be the worst of the conditions around Yorkton, down to about half a kilometer, maybe even close to zero visibility there, and then things quickly burning off by the time we get to the noon hour. Showers already starting to build in the southwest, and some heavier showers falling now close to Lloydminster, and as we head through the night tonight, we are watching that system move move to the north, and some moderate showers moving through the far north of the province. Tomorrow afternoon, maybe some spotty showers in and around Regina and portions of southern Saskatchewan. The western side and northwestern part of the province going to be seeing those showers as well. And then come Sunday, we're watching that whole system to wrap around, and it's really just the north of the province that will see rain. We're clear on Sunday for the south of the province, but then Monday another system moves in and we could get some rain then. Between 5 and 10 millimeters for places like La Loche, Buffalo Narrows, Isle La Crosse, overnight tonight into tomorrow morning. And then that system on Sunday going to bring an additional 10 millimeters to places like La Loche, Key Lake, and Fond du Lac. But outside of there, pretty dry for the most part. Winds should remain relatively light for much of the province, save for maybe the southwest tomorrow, and then they shift to the west central part of the province come Sunday, gusts maybe close to 50 kilometers an hour. In Regina, though, remaining fairly calm and a chance of showers, as I mentioned, tomorrow with highs around 20, but Sunday's looking like a pretty nice day as we start to head into the rest of the month and get closer to fall as our temperatures start to drop, as you can see there. Saskatoon, we are looking at mostly cloudy skies tomorrow. Some showers to start Monday, and then temperatures around 15 degrees, some breezy conditions, feeling nicely like September, Sam.
All right, thanks, Ethan.
You bet.
An extraordinary scene today in London. The 4 children of Queen Elizabeth, including King Charles, standing beside her coffin. It's called the Vigil of the Princes. Even though Anne is a princess, the 10-minute vigil went on while civilian mourners filed past, as they have been all day. We'll have more on the royals after the break. Stay with us. Commemorating the Queen has triggered some controversy in Canada. Students and parents are dealing with a variety of holidays and school days across the country. As Deanna Sumanak-Johnson reports, it's presenting some complications.
At least one large school board in Ontario thinks the best way to commemorate the Queen's funeral is to not commemorate it at all. In a memo obtained by CBC News, the York Region District School Board wrote, "We request that school staff please refrain from developing tributes or activities to memorialize the death of the Queen. For some, the death of the Queen is very triggering." The concern is for students whose families may have been affected by British colonialism.
Start with where our students are. And all the memo did is said to center our students in the moment and plan accordingly for what they need.
But that did not sit well with the province's Minister of Education. In a statement to CBC News, Stephen Lecce wrote, "We have made clear our direction that all schools are to recognize the profound impact of Queen Elizabeth II's lifelong and unwavering devotion to public service. I have directed this board to implement the province's expectation."
In other parts of Canada, the impact of the Queen's funeral is being felt in other ways, especially for parents. Educators in the prairies were encouraged, though not mandated, to acknowledge the event. But BC and the Maritimes gave the kids a day off.
The problem is not too many parents will get a day off themselves.
It means that I have to take the day off of work. And I'm a therapist, and so my clients won't be able to see me that day so that I can stay home with my son. For people who don't make a lot of money, for parents who don't make a lot of money, I can't even imagine what it would be like for them. It's a huge amount of stress.
Another public holiday in September as families try to get back to a routine after years of pandemic disruptions.
Parents are extremely concerned about learning loss. Learning loss is a real issue this year, more than any other year.
As complex discussions about how to acknowledge the Queen's legacy continue even on the very last part of her journey. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
What seemed like an unending line continued today in London. Mourners in a queue that stretched for kilometers waiting to file past the Queen's coffin. At the same time, Canadians began arriving for Monday's funeral. Chris Brown reports.
Officers! The world is converging on London for the Queen's funeral, including soldiers from Canada and Commonwealth countries. The New Zealanders performed a haka, a ceremonial Maori dance, for the Prince and Princess of Wales at a military training centre near the city. 80 Canadian soldiers are here, representing units the Queen had a special connection to. And they're rehearsing through the night for their roles.
When we turned on to the main stretch and we saw the flags and you saw the palace at the other end, I mean, it got very real for everybody.
She was our queen, she was our sovereign, and
for us to lead her to her final resting place, it means so much, and it's such an honor to be here.
Meanwhile, the huge crowds of people hoping to pay their respects to the Queen before the funeral continues to grow. This line, the queue of all queues, continues to move tens of thousands of people through the city to Westminster Hall and ultimately past the Queen's coffin. Entry to the line was temporarily halted earlier today but is now reopened, with organizers telling mourners they can expect waits of up to 24 hours. While some VIPs, such as former UK Prime Minister Theresa May, were allowed to skip the line, other famous Britons, such as soccer star David Beckham, waited with everyone else.
Everyone feels the same, and that's why we all queued up today, because I think it's the right thing to do.
King Charles, meanwhile, visited Wales, where someone gave him a pen as a joke, just in case, they said.
Oh God, I hate it.
A reference to his much publicized frustrations with the official pens that didn't work. He addressed the Parliament in Welsh, a language he learned before his investiture as a Prince of Wales in 1969.
I take up my new duties with immense gratitude for the privilege of having been able to serve as Prince of Wales.
By day's end, Charles and his siblings had returned to London for a more somber duty, another vigil at the Queen's side. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Ralph Goodale is Canada's High Commissioner to the UK and Northern Ireland. The former Regina MP will be attending the Queen's funeral, and he says the RCMP will also be involved.
Oh, it's huge. Being part of this cortege, and especially the last part of it, before you get to the arch, where the body will be moved to the royal hearse and then the drive out to Windsor. That last part of it is the final farewell, and having the honor and the responsibility of actually being at the very front of it. I believe the Metropolitan Police are first for security reasons, and then the RCMP. Her Majesty was very fond of the Mounties. She visited often with them. Whenever she was in Canada, they were part of the visit.
So would this have been her personal choice, to your understanding?
Well, I don't know if we'll ever know the real detail of that, but I suspect she had something to do with it.
Join Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault live in London on Monday for a CBC News special covering the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Our coverage begins at 3 a.m. local time on all CBC platforms. Matt Galloway will also be in London hosting our CBC Radio News special with Marcia Young, starting at 3:30 Monday morning. And Ethan is back with one last look at tonight's weather.
And after a partly cloudy evening, we are looking at a partly cloudy morning as well, Sam. 10 degrees at 8 a.m., some sun and cloud, nice light southeast winds, and that sun and cloud will stick around as we head to the afternoon. 18 degrees. Look for showers possibly to build in a little later in the afternoon hours, maybe early evening too. Saskatoon, no showers, but mostly cloudy conditions tomorrow at 8 a.m., and the same for when we get to the afternoon at around 19 degrees. And if you're heading to the Rider game tonight at Mosaic Stadium, well, you will have mostly cloudy conditions to start at kickoff. 15 degrees, southeast winds up around 25 kilometers an hour. But for the fireworks, Sam, we are expecting some conditions to clear out, and it should be quite nice.
It's going to be lights on and lights out.
That's all. Exactly.
Thanks, Ethan.
You bet.
And that is it for us this week. For news anytime, you can head to cbc.ca/sask or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Ethan will be back with more news and highlights from that game at 11. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.